Did you know that over 3 million Australians are now skipping meals just to pay their bills? Or that rent in major cities has jumped by more than 20% in just the last 2 years? It's no longer just a headline, it's a full-blown crisis, and it's hitting everyday Aussies harder than ever before. You might be wondering, how did it get this bad? Wages haven't kept up, groceries are getting more expensive by the week, and don't even get started on power bills. But the real shock? This could be just the beginning. Experts warn that without urgent changes, the average Australian lifestyle may become unsustainable within the next few years. In this video, we're diving into 10 powerful reasons why the cost of living in Australia is reaching a breaking point in 2026. Some of these may surprise you, and others may hit painfully close to home.
Number 1. Inflation that refuses to cool. Inflation was supposed to slow down by now, but in 2026, it's still quietly draining Australian households. Despite repeated interest rate hikes by the Reserve Bank of Australia, the prices of essentials like food, rent, insurance, and energy continue to rise. On paper, inflation may look under control, but in real life, Australians feel the opposite every time they tap their card at the checkout. What makes this worse is that inflation today isn't driven by luxury spending, it's driven by the bare necessities of survival. The most painful part? This type of inflation is sticky. Grocery items don't come back down once prices rise. Energy companies lock in higher charges. Landlords pass rising costs directly onto tenants. According to data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics, everyday household expenses are rising faster than the official inflation rate, meaning families are falling behind even when the numbers say things are improving. It creates a dangerous illusion. Policymakers relax, while households struggle even more. For the average Australian, this means constant financial pressure. Budgets that worked just a year ago no longer make sense. Families are cutting back on fresh food, delaying medical visits, and canceling small joys like eating out or weekend trips. Inflation isn't just an economic term anymore, it's a daily emotional stress. And when inflation sticks around this long, it doesn't just shrink wallets, it reshapes lifestyles, lowers quality of life, and pushes millions closer to a financial breaking point.
Number 2. Wages that can't keep up. While the prices of everything from bread to broadband keep climbing, Australian wages have barely moved. Yes, some workers have seen small increases, but when compared to the relentless rise in living costs, those gains vanish almost instantly. The hard truth is that real wage growth, what's left after inflation, has stalled, and for many it's even gone backwards. A pay rise of 3% means little when your grocery bill has jumped 10% and rent is soared by 15%. It's like trying to run up a down escalator. No matter how fast you move, you're still falling behind. This mismatch between income and expenses is forcing many Australians to rethink how they live. Dual-income households are now struggling to cover what a single income used to handle. Young adults are delaying moving out. Parents are skipping meals so their children can eat. The so-called middle class is shrinking as more people fall into financial stress despite doing everything right. It's no longer just the unemployed or underemployed feeling the squeeze. Even full-time workers are drowning under the weight of everyday expenses. What's more concerning is the psychological toll this takes. When hard work no longer guarantees stability, people start to lose faith in the system. They stop spending, stop saving, and stop believing in upward mobility. This has ripple effects across the economy, dragging down consumer confidence and slowing growth even further. And with no major wage reforms in sight, many Australians are left with a painful question. What's the point of working harder if it's never enough? The wage crisis isn't just about money, it's about the shattering of a long-held belief that effort leads to reward.
Number 3. Rent is out of control. Across Australia, rent prices have exploded, and for millions of renters, it's becoming simply unaffordable to keep a roof over their heads. Since 2023, rents in cities like Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane have jumped by over 20%, with some areas seeing increases even higher. What's worse is that this isn't just a temporary spike. It's part of a long-term trend driven by low housing supply, rising interest rates, and population growth. For many tenants, that means rent increases every time a lease ends, sometimes by hundreds of dollars a month. There's little room to negotiate when there are dozens of other desperate renters lining up at inspections. The vacancy rate in major cities has dropped below 1%, creating an ultra-competitive rental market. Families are being forced to downsize, relocate far from their jobs, or accept poor living conditions just to have a place to live. Share housing, once mostly for students, is now becoming the only option for working adults who can't afford to live alone. Emergency housing services are overwhelmed, and even middle-income earners are being priced out of neighborhoods they've lived in for years. It's not just a housing issue, it's a human crisis, with more Australians than ever teetering on the edge of homelessness. This pressure cooker situation is creating long-term social and economic damage. People are delaying having children, quitting jobs that require long commutes, and spending a growing share of their income just to stay housed. When rent absorbs 40% or more of your paycheck, there's little left for savings, health, education, or even food. Australia's rental market is no longer just tight, it's broken. And unless serious reforms happen soon, this affordability crisis could become the defining issue of an entire generation.
Number 4. Owning a home is becoming a fantasy. For many Australians, the dream of owning a home is slipping further out of reach with every passing year. In 2026, median house prices in cities like Sydney and Melbourne remain well above $1 million, and even regional areas are seeing record highs. This isn't just a bubble, it's a reflection of deep systemic issues. Limited housing supply, foreign investment, tax policies that favor property owners, and rising construction costs have all collided to create a market where first home buyers simply can't compete. The required deposit alone is often more than most people can save in a decade. Even for those who manage to buy, the burden doesn't stop. Mortgage repayments have skyrocketed thanks to rising interest rates. A loan that was manageable just 2 years ago can now cost hundreds, even thousands more each month. As a result, many new homeowners are now mortgage-stressed, spending over 30% of their income on repayments and cutting back heavily on everything else. At the same time, property investors continue to grow their portfolios, further tightening the market and pushing prices higher for everyone else. The consequences are massive. Young adults are delaying financial milestones, from moving out to starting families, simply because they can't secure stable housing. More people are staying in the rental market longer, placing even more pressure on an already broken system. And psychologically, there's a growing sense of hopelessness, especially among younger generations who feel the system is rigged against them. When the idea of owning a modest home becomes a lifetime pursuit instead of a reachable goal, it's not just a housing issue, it's a national identity crisis, shaking the foundations of what Australians were once promised.
Number 5. Power bills are crushing households. Electricity and gas bills in Australia have reached unprecedented levels, and for many households, they've become just as stressful as rent or mortgage repayments. Since 2022, the average annual energy bill has doubled in some parts of the country. In 2026, it's not uncommon to see families paying over $3,000 a year just to keep the lights on and heaters running. What's causing this surge? A complex mix of global energy shocks, aging infrastructure, climate disasters, and the high costs of transitioning to renewable energy, all of which are being passed down to the consumer. Australia's energy market has been hit from all sides. The war in Ukraine disrupted global gas supplies. Floods and bushfires have damaged transmission lines and reduced energy output. At the same time, coal-fired power stations are shutting down faster than renewables can take over, creating gaps in supply and pushing wholesale prices higher. Although the shift to green energy is essential, the short-term costs of that transition are being shouldered by ordinary people, many of whom are already on tight budgets. For low-income households, this means choosing between heating their homes and buying groceries. The emotional weight of these bills is just as heavy as the financial one. Families are constantly watching the thermostat, turning off appliances, and avoiding using air conditioners during heat waves, all in an effort to cut costs. Some pensioners and vulnerable Australians are going without heating in winter or cooling in summer, putting their health at serious risk. What used to be a basic utility is now a source of anxiety and sacrifice. Until stronger protections are in place and energy systems are modernized, Australians will continue to pay the price, quite literally, for a system that's failing to keep pace. If any of this is hitting close to home, pause for a second and drop a comment. We'd love to hear how rising costs are affecting your life. And if you're finding this video valuable, support our work by subscribing. It's just one click, but it helps us keep making content that matters.
Number 6. Grocery prices keep climbing. Walking into the supermarket in 2026 feels more like a budgeting challenge than a routine errand. The price of everyday essentials, bread, milk, eggs, fresh fruit and vegetables, has surged beyond what most Australians can comfortably afford. Since 2023, grocery costs have risen by over 15%, and for some items, the increases are even more shocking. A lettuce that once cost $2 is now closer to $5. A carton of eggs nearly doubled. These aren't luxury items, they're basic necessities. And for many households, shopping for food now requires cutting back on nutrition, variety, and even total meals. The reasons behind these rising prices are complex but painfully clear. Extreme weather events like floods, droughts, and bushfires have battered Australia's agricultural sector. Crops are being destroyed before they can be harvested, and livestock feed is becoming more expensive and harder to access. On top of that, global supply chain disruptions and rising fuel costs have made transportation and packaging more expensive, all of which gets passed directly onto the shelves. Even when items are available, the cost of getting them from farm to store has skyrocketed, and there's no clear end in sight. The result? Many Australians are now downscaling their diets, avoiding healthy, fresh options in favor of cheaper, processed alternatives. Parents are skipping meals to feed their kids, and food banks are reporting record demand. For those already living paycheck to paycheck, these grocery hikes are devastating. Food insecurity is no longer just an issue in remote or disadvantaged communities, it's spreading into the suburbs and cities, affecting people who once considered themselves financially stable. When the simple act of buying dinner becomes a weekly struggle, it's a clear sign that something is deeply wrong in the system. Number 7. Childcare and schooling are draining families. Raising a child in Australia has never been cheap. But in 2026, it's becoming nearly unmanageable for many families. Despite increased government subsidies, childcare fees remain high, with some centers charging over $160 per day per child in metro areas. And that's if you can even find a spot. Wait lists at many early learning centers stretch for months, even years, leaving parents stuck without options. For those lucky enough to secure care, the costs are eating into household budgets to the point where many parents are forced to reduce working hours, simply because working more doesn't cover the childcare bill. But it doesn't stop with daycare. Schooling expenses are also climbing fast, not just in private institutions, but in public schools too. Uniforms, technology fees, excursions, sport programs, and extracurricular activities have all risen in cost. Parents are often hit with unexpected levies throughout the year, adding hundreds or even thousands to the real cost of education. For families with multiple children, these costs compound quickly, turning education into a source of financial stress rather than opportunity. And with public school funding not keeping up with growing demand, many parents feel pressured to pay extra just to ensure their kids aren't left behind. These rising costs have wider consequences. Families are delaying having more children or choosing not to have them at all. In some cases, parents are withdrawing children from programs they once saw as essential for development, simply because they can't afford them anymore. The pressure to provide a good start in life is being met with a system that's increasingly expensive, overburdened, and difficult to navigate. When education and care, the very things that shape the next generation, become unaffordable luxuries, we're no longer just talking about financial stress.
we're talking about a broken promise to Australia's future.
Number 8. We rely too much on imports. Australia's heavy dependence on imported goods has become a serious vulnerability, and in 2026, it's one of the key reasons everyday costs keep rising. From electronics and fuel to household items and even some food products, a large portion of what Australians consume comes from overseas. This means when global supply chains are disrupted by war, pandemics, trade disputes, or natural disasters, Australians feel the impact immediately. Prices spike, shelves empty, and consumers have little choice but to pay more for less. One major factor making things worse is the weak Australian dollar, which has lost value against major currencies like the US dollar and euro. When our currency falls, everything we import becomes more expensive, and those costs get passed straight to the customer. That's why things like petrol, mobile phones, and even supermarket basics can cost significantly more here than in countries with stronger local manufacturing. Australia's limited domestic production leaves us exposed, and without urgent investment in local industries, we'll continue to be at the mercy of global markets. This import reliance doesn't just impact prices, it also affects our resilience as a nation. If international shipping grinds to a halt or geopolitical tensions flare up, we could see severe shortages of critical goods. And while governments talk about boosting local manufacturing, change has been slow and costly. In the meantime, Australians are stuck paying more for products they once took for granted, with little control over when or how those prices will stabilize. Until we reduce our dependency on global supply chains, we're effectively outsourcing control of our own cost of living, and the consequences are hitting harder with every passing year.
Number 9. Healthcare is no longer truly affordable. Healthcare in Australia was once seen as a pillar of stability, a system that offered quality care to everyone, regardless of income. But in 2026, that promise is slowly falling apart. Private health insurance premiums have climbed year after year, rising well above inflation, while the benefits seem to shrink. Basic coverage now leaves major gaps, and many Australians are shocked to discover just how little is actually included until they need it. Meanwhile, the public system is under massive strain, with longer wait times, overworked staff, and growing backlogs in essential services. As a result, more people are turning to out-of-pocket options, paying for specialists, diagnostics, dental, and mental health services themselves. But those costs can be crushing. A single visit to a specialist can run into hundreds of dollars, and routine dental work has become a luxury for many. Even Medicare-covered services often come with gap fees that add up quickly. Bulk billing clinics, once widely available, are becoming harder to find, especially in regional and suburban areas. Australians are now forced to ask themselves, can I afford to get sick? This shift has serious implications. People are delaying care, skipping medications, and avoiding checkups, not because they don't want to be healthy, but because they simply can't afford the bills. Preventable conditions are turning into chronic illnesses, and mental health support is out of reach for those who need it most. For a country that prides itself on fairness and equality, the healthcare divide is growing deeper. Unless bold reforms are introduced to restore affordability and access, Australians will continue to pay the price, not just in dollars, but in their long-term well-being and peace of mind.
Number 10. Climate disasters are making everything cost more. Australia has always been a country shaped by nature, but in recent years, climate disasters have become more frequent, more intense, and far more expensive. From devastating bushfires and record-breaking floods to prolonged droughts and extreme heat waves, these events are no longer once-in-a-decade occurrences. They're happening every year, and the financial toll is hitting everyone. These disasters damage crops, disrupt supply chains, destroy homes, and push up the cost of insurance, food, and essential services. And while the destruction may seem temporary, the economic aftershocks can last for months or even years. Farmers are among the hardest hit, facing ruined harvests and unpredictable seasons. When agriculture suffers, food prices surge across the board, not just fresh produce, but also meat, dairy, and grains. In 2026, we're seeing the effects of multiple bad seasons in a row, which has pushed up grocery costs and led to shortages in key products. At the same time, communities recovering from disasters are spending more on rebuilding, insurance, and emergency services. And much of that cost eventually flows back to everyday consumers through higher premiums and taxes. But perhaps the most dangerous part is how these climate-driven expenses are becoming a permanent part of the cost of living. Insurance premiums are rising sharply, especially in areas deemed high risk, forcing many to go uninsured or underinsured. Energy networks, transport systems, and public infrastructure all need constant repair and upgrades to cope with climate extremes, costs that are ultimately paid by the public. In other words, climate change is no longer a distant threat. It's a direct financial burden, quietly inflating prices and reshaping the economy. And unless we adapt faster, both in policy and infrastructure, these pressures will only get worse.
Australia's cost of living crisis in 2026 is not the result of a single event. It's a perfect storm of rising prices, stagnant wages, and broken systems. From unaffordable housing and soaring rent to skyrocketing grocery bills, energy costs, and inaccessible healthcare, the financial pressure is being felt in every corner of daily life. And for millions of Australians, it's not just about cutting back on luxuries. It's about struggling to afford the basics: food, shelter, education, and safety. What makes this crisis even more dangerous is how deeply interconnected these problems are. A rise in rent impacts mental health. High power bills make people choose between heating and groceries. Inaccessible childcare forces parents out of work, reducing income while increasing stress. These aren't just individual struggles, they're part of a wider breakdown that affects entire communities, reshapes family life, and undermines the very idea of security that Australians once relied on. But recognizing the problem is the first step toward change. As Australians, we have the power to demand better from our leaders, our systems, and ourselves. It's time to have honest conversations about where the country is headed and what needs to be fixed. Because if this continues unchecked, we won't just be adjusting to higher prices, we'll be watching an entire generation lose the chance to build a stable, secure life in the country they call home. If this video gave you something to think about, tell us your story in the comments. What part of this crisis is affecting you the most? And if you found value in this, support us by subscribing. We put a huge amount of time and effort into creating these videos to inform and empower you, and subscribing is just one click that helps us keep going.